Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me this morning. Let me know if not. So welcome to our Scott and Liz Scott Cyber Focus call this morning. Today we're focusing not so much on that immediate reaction that we all had to face when we moved to lockdown, but more about what's going to happen over the next few months and beyond. And so we have really a couple of very interesting topics around that. So, for example, we have Brian Boyd from iConfidential is going to talk about how are we going to maximise the cybersecurity budgets. We know a lot of companies have been impacted, budgets will be constrained. So how do you maximise it, prioritise how you spend it, but also try and have those conversations with business leaders to justify retaining it and holding on to it, or at least making sure they understand the risks if they are cutting back. So it's a risk that you're both signing up to, rather than it being kind of on the heads of the security team. So that's fine. We'll then have Sandy Forrest and Garrett Lawrence from Atos talk to us about future resilience. There's a lot of companies that got caught out a little bit with, it's not surprisingly, with this pandemic and this sudden move to lockdown. And I'm so many had major incident plans that they had in drawers or filed away that they hadn't looked at in a little while. So how can we learn from this, and prepare ourselves better for the next major incident? Might be something that looks very different from from coronavirus. Could be a major software attack, breach, etc. But how do we prepare ourselves for the unknown and for what might be coming? And there's the things we can learn from what we've been going through. Now, we had hoped to have Irene Coyle from OSP Cyber Academy on, but unfortunately Irene can't join us due to health reasons. So what we're going to do instead is, after the two speakers, we'll do a little panel around cybersecurity. So I've put together a few thoughts, things I know Irene is very passionate about as well, that we'll just kick off that as a quick discussion around cybersecurity, and just how we continue to maintain that. It's always a topic on any kind of cybersecurity event you go to about cybersecurity, and that was when we were in offices. So now it's even more important when people are at home surrounded by pets, parents, kids, who knows what, and still trying to have that work kind of frame of mind and that safety and safety culture that we're expecting to go with it. So we'll have a panel around that, and then we'll come on to Q&A. If anyone has any questions at any point, just raise them into Q&A and we'll take them all up at the end, if that's okay. There was one submitted in advance, so I have that ready to go as well. And also, if people do want to speak, if they prefer to actually be part of the conversation at the end, there is that option as well. Just use the raise hand symbol and we'll just connect in with you to see what is it you wanted to kind of bring up. And then we can open your line, or whatever it's called these days, at the end, so you can actually be part of the conversation. That's certainly an option if anyone does wish to do that. So that's probably enough for me. So I hopefully we won't have any technology issues. We all seem to be online. You might find people using the video, not using it, just depending on how broadbands are working. But fingers crossed, technology won't let us down. But with that, I'm going to hand over to Brian Boyd from iConfidential.
Thanks very much for that. Hopefully I won't have too many technology problems yet. So let me just share this presentation with everyone. And hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so I'm Brian Boyd and I work for iConfidential. For those that don't know, iConfidential is an Edinburgh-based company who specialise in the management of security. As Kira says, if we could save the questions to the end, that'd be really helpful. It's fair to say over the years that security has become, well, let's say complicated. It's certainly fragmented with all different kinds of tools and all different kinds of controls. It's becoming more and more important, I think, to ensure that it's managed appropriately. And with that complexity has come increased budgets. And because we all like to spend our budget, so we get it the following year, that's led to increased spend. And as the spend has increased, there's now greater oversight from the likes of CIOs, and also they are interested in security. So being very clear about where you're spending and where you're not spending is a very important consideration. We'd always recommend looking at spend and making a decision on whether it's prioritized correctly. So today I'm going to talk about how to prioritize a security budget. So quick background on me. I've been with iConfidential for over 3 years now. And during that time, I've carried out a number of security reviews and suggested a number of 3-year service improvement programs for companies. iConfidential was founded in 2008, and we've been an employee-owned trust since 2018. We're based in Edinburgh, 25 employees, and around 200 close associates. Our clients include many household names. We work and advise many people from CIOs down. We like to think that we build partnerships with our clients, and that's why we tend to stay connected. And we've been at the heart of some of the UK's banking most advanced security programs. So we work on the premise of understand, fix, and manage the problem. And to that end, one of the products that we've used for many clients is something called ISS and I Decide. So ISS helps organizations to understand where their security is in relation to the risk. It's an organization-wide review of how security is performed. So it's really important to do this kind of independent review. But I think some recent research suggests that only 31% of organizations have actually done it. So once we understand the actual security position, most of our clients then ask us to use our tool set, I Decide, to determine what they need to fix, how they need to fix it, how much that's going to cost, and in what order they should fix things. Now this is generally done after a very detailed assessment. So today, for the sake of this webinar, I'm going to talk at a slightly higher level. So I was planning to write an article for LinkedIn looking at how to build a security improvement program kind of by yourself, a kind of do-it-yourself thing. But that wasn't going to be until later in the year. I think the events of the past few months have really brought that forward. So I kind of hope that the insight would help people. I mean, it is something that we would strongly recommend is done regularly. I just think that now we've got the opportunity to really consider what we're looking to do with it. So if you don't mind, let me set the scene by discussing the 3 phases we've seen many organizations go through or still going through. The first phase is, I think, the firefighting stage. And many firms will still be in that particular stage, and this is where organizations are just doing their best to stay afloat. I think it's also the stage, though, where prioritization decisions are at the most fraught and sometimes taken, although with the best intentions, hastily. But these steps have been necessary to get people working again and ensure the survival of the company. So most of us will be sitting at home just now. There's been a massive increase in home working, and this was necessary really to ensure a continuity of service. As a result, what have we seen? Well, we've seen the supply of laptops running really low, and apparently there's only so much toilet rolls to go around as well. Social distancing in the workplace has become one of the key concerns that people have. I think this leads to some inevitable questions, where firms have had to spend money that they've not budgeted for. So the money has to come from somewhere, and I don't think that the security functions just get away with it. So they are being asked, can you cut your budget? In some cases, they've been asked, do you need to spend more? But I think the more important question is, are we spending in the right place, given the changing environment in which we're working? In phase 1, it was a case of you just had to find the budget. The next phase, though, I'm calling legacy phase. What do we want to take away from this? All this change has resulted in things that work well, things that don't work so well, and some completely new things. Essentially, it's created a huge momentum to change. We have to ask ourselves, what do we want to keep from this? What do we take away? What do we now understand about our priorities? So, for example, has the risk appetite changed, or is it that we just understand it better? When we were buying the laptops and quickly building them and sending them out for remote working, what changed in our view of that home working risk? It's just possible that we better understand the actual cost of operation. Like, who knew about Zoom 3 or 4 months ago? And yet, we're all doing it now. Small company suddenly at the forefront of our thought, $320 million sales between February and April. And we all used it. until we started seeing the unfortunate and well-reported issues that started coming up with it. And it's only just within the last week that Zoom started fixing some of the security shortfalls in its product. But on the subject of laptops, let's look at organisations who are now suggesting that working from home will become the new permanent norm. Would this have been possible without this particular issue, meaning that people actually have to work from home? Do we really need crisis centres anymore? I'm not sure we would have seen such a dramatic change. So in the end, it's about what we want to take away from the change. Let's build that into our prioritisation. So let's think about phase 3, which is really what this is all about, the replanning phase. And I'd like to split that into 2 elements. Firstly, I'm going to look at things that you should consider in the planning and prioritisation element. And then secondly, I'm going to list some of the things that once you've done the prioritisation, you need to take into account to deliver a successful service improvement programme. So firstly, it's important to understand the type of business and therefore the type of threat associated with that business. Let's say, for example, you're an organisation that sends lots of emails to customers. We've seen a number of organisations who are now looking to improve their email security because fraudsters are trying to take advantage of the current situation by sending lots of spoof mails and asking for customer details. And that still works. It's possible those companies knew about that risk, but now the increase in probability of the risk materialising has now taken it outside of appetite. The threat changed, and that needs to be understood. The second area we always consider is how critical an asset is. So most people will think of an asset as something like a house. It's something that has value. In this sense, I'm talking about all the material things that make up the digital operation. A lot of organisations that we review, whilst they have a good handle on their assets, may not know them all or the priority of those assets. One of the more interesting aspects of the response to the pandemic has been an acknowledgement that certain assets are perhaps more important than they perceive to be. So if we were to use the idea of critical asset and apply that to people, perhaps before this issue, we would not have classified delivery drivers as critical assets. But I think that's absolutely the case now. We also need to consider critical data. By critical data, I mean the intellectual property or customer details your organisation holds that has value. For some organisations, they simply do not own physical assets. However, they do own data. This is just as crucial to understand as the assets, because these critical assets or data is what we're absolutely trying to protect. For example, you may own a house, and as we've seen, that's got value, but so do the things inside the house. The information on that bank statement or credit card statement may have value to someone who's trying to defraud you. It's also good to understand current control strength. We need to objectively look at our controls and assess how effective they are. Where we cannot look objectively, we will simply have to find a subjective way to review those controls. But if you have really strong controls in an area where the threat would be difficult to realise, then you may not want to put as high a priority on improving those areas. Let's carry on that housing analogy. If you have the best front door in the world, it's got multiple locks and it takes 3 keys to open, you may want to spend your money on the back gate or the back window. It doesn't always shut properly before you put more money into your front door. Or perhaps not leaving the front door keys under the brick at the side would help as well. We always consider when prioritising an improvement programme where the big hitters are. What control improvements give you the biggest bang for buck? If there's a very small cost piece initiative which gives you huge gains in control strength, then that's a natural to be prioritised upwards. However, if you have very complex projects which will require several years to see a return on, you may want to look to see if there's other things you can do to improve the control in the interim. And lastly, one of the things that some people don't consider is think about partial delivery. It may be that you don't need to roll out that control to everything. Consider the benefits of rolling out the full improvement against, say, 80%, and using the remaining 20% to look at other control areas which are not as effective. Just because you start that project doesn't mean that the best benefit is to finish at 100%. So from a prioritization point of view, consider the threat, where your critical data and assets are, what your current control strength is. Think about the big hitters, where's the biggest bang for buck? And remember that the most efficient way to protect your organization may not mean rolling out all controls to all things. Okay, so here we have some of the things to consider once you've prioritized your improvement program and want to deliver it. Watch out for complexity. It can kill projects, and it means the return on investment diminishes over time. If you've got lots of small projects requiring intricate detail, it can be very time consuming and therefore costly. One thing we've seen every time in clients is that whilst they may run a very successful program to either introduce a new control or close a control gap, they never consider the remediation impact of that new control. Let's take the example of someone who takes a car to the garage for an MOT. They know they'll have to pay the £40 for the MOT, but quite often they do not consider the additional cost of anything that needs to be fixed in the car. It's the same when you deliver a security project. When you introduce better vulnerability management, guess what? You're going to see lots of vulnerabilities that you need to fix. Something that we also ask our clients to consider is how they pay for security improvements. All too often, it's easy to go down the capitalization approach, where you go out and buy something and run it yourself. But nowadays, much more options available when looking to provide all these different types of security services, and some of them can be operational costs. So taking the car analogy further, you might want to buy the service plan rather than forking out every year on an anniversary for the service cost. Another thing to consider is overlapping controls. Now, this can be good because it means you have better protection. However, we've been in organizations where perhaps there are 4 or 5 different solutions all providing the same thing. Usually there's money to be saved there, and it may be that that control doesn't need to improve as much as first thought. And lastly, if this is an area where you struggle, look to others in the organization who can perhaps help. For example, just because someone doesn't have the title cyber in their name doesn't mean that they can't help in some way. Perhaps you have someone who's great at qualifying risk and who can come in, ask the right questions and ensure that they understand the risk that you're actually taking. There's always help at hand. As I mentioned at the start, it's really important to be clear on what you are and not spending on and what the impact of that spend is. This really is the type of information that the board needs to operate effectively. I really do believe at times like this, it brings out the best in people. And it's really important that we use this momentum to change things for the better. And who knows, we might end up with a better improvement program than you had, and you may even cost you less than you thought. Many thanks for listening.
Thanks, Brian. That was great. Some really, really good points, I have to admit, that we'll take up in the Q&A, and certainly given me a lot of food for thought in a number of those areas. So really appreciate it. We won't take any questions now. We'll leave it to the end. So instead, I'll just pass you straight over to Sandy and Garrett, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Let me just. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present today this exciting webinar run by Scotland Is. So my name is Gareth Lawrence. Unfortunately, you can't, well, maybe fortunately for you, you can't see my video, but I'm also joined today with my colleague, Sandy Forrest. So I work within the health and life sciences industry within Atos. And maybe Sandy, if I just pass over to you just to give a quick intro before I kick off.
Hi, so I'm Sandy Forrest. I'm the video you can see that's called Gareth Lawrence. A sharing was a sharing offence or something like that. So I'm client executive for cybersecurity. So my job is to coordinate what Atos does in cybersecurity across the advice products and services that we deliver UK and Ireland. And my specialist sort of area is public sector and defence, which is where I'm spending most of my time at the moment. So back to you, Gareth.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. So today we've been asked to cover future resilience and how we can learn from the present situation with COVID-19. I think everyone's clear the topic of cyber security is of paramount importance to any organisation, regardless of its size and or its purpose. And I think now more than ever, as Brian was also just kind of focusing on there, that every organisation needs to be considering its approach to business continuity, future resilience. And actually, the COVID-19 has also brought new opportunities for cyber criminals, as well as the risk that was there before. So what we want to do, let me just go to the next slide. Yeah, so what we want to do first is to consider that, the considerations here is think about future resilience and to consider how prepared we are to deal with the next pandemic or a major global incident. And whilst the threat of a pandemic such as COVID-19 was known, and we'll touch on that just shortly, I suspect many organisations did not have this high on their risk mitigation plan 6 months ago, because it was probably seen as too far ahead or unlikely to happen around the corner. But the response to COVID-19 has led to changes in how we operate, where we operate, changes in the tools our staff use to do their job, where they do their job, how customers interact with us, and how we interact with our supply chain and partners to deliver services and interaction with customers. And many of these changes are defining the new normal we can expect to see post-lockdown being eased. I think as I go through some of the early slides here, it also really reinforces the comments and the kind of feedback you just heard from Brian earlier. And I look to add some further kind of thoughts and insights into that. The slides we're going to go through today are not providing a prescriptive strategy or a framework, but meant to prompt us to consider, have we learnt the lessons? What do we need to consider as we start to get back to normal or the new normal? And to consider the major incident response and key areas that we need to think about to be more prepared in the future. So before I kind of hand over to kind of Sandy to go through a lot of this in more detail, I'm going to spend a few minutes to consider the classification of risk and to prompt some thought in how organizations consider their cyber posture. So first consideration just on the screen here. So are grey rhinos a bigger threat than black swans? So what do we mean by this? Most of you will have heard about the terms grey rhino and black swan, but for grey rhino, this was introduced by Michelle Wokin at the World Economic Event in 2013. And it's characterized by an event that is highly probable, has high impact, yet neglected threats. So they're not random surprises, but occur after a series of warnings and visible evidence. So for example, there's the aftermath of a natural disaster, the impact of a financial crisis, etc. Black swan is a theory developed by Nassim Nicholas Taleb in 2001 in his book Fooled by Randomness, which at that time was mainly focused on financial markets. But later in 2007, the black swan extended outside of the financial markets, and it's really based on the old saying that presumed black swans did not exist. And Taleb explains this type of event as having three main attributes. First, it is an outlier, as it lies outside the realm of regular expectations because nothing in the past can convincingly point to its possibility. Second, it carries an extreme impact. And third, in spite of its outlier status, human nature makes us concoct explanations for its occurrence after the event, making it explainable and predictable. So the diagram you see on the screen here really is taken from a Gartner doc in 2018 and provides a classification of the risk landscape. You can see the grey rhino concept here in the top right-hand corner as a high frequency and high impact, whereas the black swan has a high impact and low frequency. So let's look at this a bit further. So what do we see as the next black swan? Do we consider the electromagnetic impact from a solar flare? Although rare and extreme coronal mass ejection, a large burst of plasma sent out by the sun could cause a months-long blackout, harm satellites and cause billions of pounds in damage. That is guaranteed to happen sometime, but probably not in the next few years. So we see it as a black swan, i.e. catastrophic, but highly unlikely in the current era. Actually, in the last few days, there have been reports that the sun unleashed a strong solar flare last week for the first time since 2017. However, nothing like the biggest solar storm on record in 1859, which was dubbed the Carrington event after the British astronomer Richard Carrington. Richard Carrington witnessed the solar flare and realized the link between activity in the sun and the geomagnetic disturbances on Earth. If we are hit with a large event like 1859, today, the risks would be more severe and have a major impact on the stability of critical infrastructure. For example, energy, utilities, electricity for data centres, impact on hospitals, etc. Looking back across previous articles in 2012, the Cabinet Office included the risk of solar flares alongside terrorism, floods, pandemics, and a list of catastrophes that could damage the country. What does that mean? Does that mean that we now invest in new data centers that protect a large coronal magnetic effect again? Possibly not. It will happen, but around the corner. But what about the risk from zoonotic diseases? We've now experienced this. So based on the fact we knew the risk from a zoonotic disease is COVID-19, is it a grey rhino or a black swan? So whilst the risk was understood, we actually probably have underestimated the impact from COVID-19 rather than considering it as the likelihood. And you can see the reference to Bill Gates, who several years ago said that the thing that worried him the most was a pandemic, as we were ill prepared for it. The changes required to mitigate the spread has resulted in a number of people losing their life. It's resulted in global lockdowns, social distancing, governments paying furlough and wages for people, risk of financial crashes not seen before, and that race to find drug treatments and vaccines. And certainly the impact from COVID-19 is going to change the way we operate moving forward, and we will not go back to where we were. And now we have a better idea of the impact from this event, demonstrating the importance of understanding the impact as well as the frequency of a risk. So how do we focus on managing the cyber risk? The key question is, are your cyber risk appetite and posture in harmony? And within the context of cyber, the threat is the same to every organization. With this growing level of cyber risk, all organizations must now factor cyber into their risk appetite and explicitly define the level of cyber risk they're willing to accept, and kind of what Brian was saying before as well in terms of that context. And it's important that that balance is right. So the cyber risk is the cyber risk and you can't change that. What's different is your risk process and your risk appetite. The big issue here is unless you understand what's happening in your infrastructure, you're probably accepting risk you didn't even know about, and that's very dangerous. Deciding to accept a risk is legitimate. Getting caught out with a risk you didn't know about because you didn't understand your infrastructure and the exposure you faced isn't. So there are no good decisions in cybersecurity, but there are decisions that you need to be able to defend. So if impacted, you're relying on your effort to have made to understand the risk and to deal with it and to show that you've put the controls in place. And you can see from the pictures here, if you have the imbalance of low controls, not enough information, then you've actually increased your risk appetite and the cyber threat hasn't gone away. So last slide before I hand over to Sandy. So again, just what Brian was touched on before and completely agree with. So as a business, we need to be thinking of what can't we do without? So is it electricity, is it infrastructure, is it internet, websites, cloud services, data, staff, revenue? And these are all the kind of particular examples of threats that could be brought from those various areas. So it could be a hostile event, a hostile state attack, which we've seen. It could be a DDoS attack on the internet. It could be the attack on data from ransomware, staff, remote access. So these are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of what can I do without, and that will help to guide the kind of focus on how the actions that you put in place to mitigate that. I'm not going to touch on the diagram too much at the bottom. It's really just a diagram provides a high-level overview, high-level view of the approach and products that Atos uses in its end-to-end service, covering data protection, advanced detection and response, cloud, digital workplace, etc., as well as new areas of threat, for example, Internet of Things. But we can go through that in a bit more detail later on. And I'm now going to hand over to Sandy to cover the key consideration in the recovery phase and beyond. Thank you very much.
Hi, Sandy Forrest here. I'm on the video. So we've talked about the new normal, post-COVID era, etc. But one of the key focuses at the moment is making sure that the rapidly introduced changes are made safe. So essentially that these things that were done, as Brian said, very, very quickly, a matter of days instead of months and years, the due diligence processes that would normally have gone into that have been accelerated, and there's issues then to be addressed. So the challenge for organisations is to adapt to the new ways of working, but make sure that they do so in a safe way. And of course, unfortunately, the new normal doesn't actually do away with the old normal. And as Brian said, there's a whole load of legacy stuff there that they want to be considering. And I think it's a point that Brian raised. Just because you've spent a whole load of money on new stuff, bring your own device, letting people work from home, etc., doesn't mean that the unpatchable servers that are out of support can be ignored going forward. And one of the important things is actually listening to the advice that we're being given by governments. Gareth, can you give me the next slide, please? I was pressing my buttons there, I'd forgotten it was Gareth. So what's happening out there? So in terms of cybercrime, NCSC has issued an advisory that says there is absolutely no evidence of an increase in criminal activity in this current phase. But what is absolutely noticeable is the extent to which that criminal activity is focused on people who are probably very, very busy dealing with the crisis. So you're seeing a number of either COVID-related or attacks on organisations that criminals think may be preoccupied with it. So for example, there was a phase of COVID maps, click this map here to find out how bad COVID is in your area, and the virus was attached to the COVID map. There was a brilliant one last week, an old exploit, but it was an Amazon phishing email, allegedly from Amazon, that said, will you accept cookies? And of course, since GDPR, they've all got to do that. They've got to make sure you accept cookies instead of just sending them to you. But the virus was in that pop-up that when you click to accept cookies, you click to accept a virus. So as I say, out there, not a scarier place in general, but a much scarier place in particular if you're in some way related to the efforts around about COVID, and therefore would be seen by an attacker as a prime candidate. Can next slide, please, Gareth? So in HR terms, we talk about temporary to permanent, where you take on somebody temporarily and you always intended that in 6 months' time they're going to get the job for full time. So my current sort of focus with clients is just consider what you've done over the last few months as the move from temporary to permanent. So as I said before, make sure that all the configurations that you've used and that the tools you've chosen are appropriately configured. And again, I'll go on in a minute to explain that that's not just my advice, that's official advice. And as I've already said, the legacy's still there. It hasn't gone away because you've got new issues. Go to the next slide, please, Gareth. So if I can give you some examples of what's had to happen with organisations to be safe since then, you'll find that advice on the use of external bring your own device and communications devices is endpoint protection is becoming increasingly important because of the amount of people who are working from home. Single sign-on is important as a way of controlling who might be able to hack into what you're doing. CASB, cloud access security brokers, are important in terms of how you access cloud capabilities. We used to talk about shadow IT as being something that you bought in PC World with your own budget and plugged it into the network. Really, that's not it nowadays. My smartphone has about 40 cloud services on it that I access through the company that the company really isn't particularly sanctioning me to do. So booking travel, your Strava, sort of timetables for trains, all of those that are cloud services are being accessed, and the use of secure VPNs becomes important to make sure that that increasing engagement with the cloud isn't compromising your company data. Again, secure remote access is really, really important. Configuration, I'll go on to explain. Over the last sort of 8 weeks, there have been rapid increases in the use of Office 365 and extension of bring your own device. As Brian said, shortage of laptops, so an increasing desire to let your staff use their own devices. It's important then that whatever security monitoring you do, Gareth was talking about, you need to know what's happening in your infrastructure. The way you know that is you monitor stuff, you monitor tools, and you have some sort of security operations centre capability, either your own or, as Brian said, outsourced to somebody. And if you don't have a CISO that understands what's happening in the world today, you could probably do no harm to obtain one temporarily, rent one or something. So if I could show you the next slide, again, validating what I was saying, there was a notification come out from the American equivalent of NCSC, and it's a long one, and it's got about 7 or 8 things that they are finding that most people have got wrong in the rapid adoption of Office 365. So what they're saying is, essentially, check your configuration. There's a piece of paper there that will tell you what to look for, what areas to focus your sort of attention on as you look at that, and you try and retrospectively make any changes you've made in the last few weeks safe. Next slide, please, Gareth. And we talked about Zoom and the implications of that. And again, there's a really, really good advisory put out by NCSC in the UK that explains how to safely use these new video conferencing facilities, how to configure them, what things to switch on, what things to switch off. I mean, in the early days of Zoom bombing, you weren't putting people in a waiting room, like you had to wait in to come onto this call. Basically, if you got the password, you were in there and you were part of the meeting. So having people waiting for permission to join, controlling who gets to share screens, who gets to delete stuff, who gets to do certain actions. Absolutely brilliant advice in there in terms of how you manage using this new communications world. I've been watching the share price of Land Securities, British Land Securities, that own just about all the offices in London. And there's a bit of a dilemma in what is the new normal, because either people are going to need more office space because of social distancing, or they're going to need less office space because of home working. What you'll find in an organisation like ours, we were very, very fortunate that as a company that sells remote working, we were entirely focused on a remote workforce. So 96.5% of our staff are currently working from home, and many of them will continue to work from home after it. So our new normal is going to be saying, what is the default? The default when I joined Atos was you needed an office to go to. Now the default is going to be, what is your reason for going to the office? We changed offices about a year ago, and what we did was we halved the size of the desk space and we doubled the size of the meeting room space. And basically what the change was is we're going to go less to the office. You only go if you need to, and we've got more space to deal with client events, etc. So the new normal, from my perspective, is going to make a lot of these changes move from temporary to permanent. The going back will be only because there's an operational reason for people to go back in our organisation. So, we're saying to people just now, don't expect to float back to the office when the Chancellor or the Prime Minister tells you that's what can happen, because we are currently making sure that we've right-sized the office space capability and we've given the right equipment to people. If I go to the next slide. So again, my next slide is covering a lot of areas that Brian copied, which is dealing with the old normal. So, the board's risk appetite. So NCSC have got their board toolkit, which essentially is a fancy way of packaging 5 questions to ask your CIO. And if your CIO can't answer these 5 questions, there's something wrong in your organisation. And as Gareth had said, make sure your cyber posture and your risk appetite are in harmony. The In terms of monitoring, you need the tools, you need to know what's happening in your infrastructure, or as Gareth said, you're accepting risk that you don't understand. Don't have stuff you can't patch, and always patch the stuff that you can, no matter how inconvenient. In any of these major sort of viral challenges, our biggest challenge is not patching, but getting permission to shut down services to allow patching. And many of our clients will say, well, you know, I just can't have that. You know, Easter weekend might be okay, maybe Christmas. You really got to accept that you're on a treadmill, and that when a vulnerability is identified, the criminals are aware of it at the same time as we are, and they will start trying to exploit it. That's true also of the world's intelligence agencies. It used to be beneath them to think that the zero-day exploits were for kids in bedrooms, and then they realise, the day after or the day you find out about a zero-day exploit, just fire it against your adversaries and see what gets through. So this idea that there's a convenient time to patch. The convenient time to patch is as soon as it's possible, rather than as soon as it's convenient. Gap analysis is exactly what Brian was talking about. You really need to keep checking that your cyber controls are adequate for the current threat. And then a plea to those who buy cyber, one of the easiest things to de-scope in a procurement is the cyber thing. And you think that you can worry about that later. So we all the time see things where there's a massive IT investment and no mention of how this is going to be secured. So remember, when you're buying new stuff, make sure that that comes adequately protected. Could have the last slide, please, Gareth? So again, our new normal and digital transformation is we're trying to help our client base make sure that what they've done over the last 10 weeks or whatever is now safe for the future, and we're happy to share our advice. I mean, it's really a one-way street what's happened. There will be no going back to normal as you knew it. Even if you want to behave that way, either your customers or your sort of suppliers will be operating differently. I'm in the middle of the first OJU I've ever heard of where we don't do competitive dialogue face-to-face. We're having to do it online because nobody can meet face-to-face. So that is, as far as we're concerned, it's all about making sure that the new normal is safe and that you don't forget the old normal. And that's the end of what I want to say. Thanks, Gareth.
That's great. Thanks, Gareth. Thanks, Sandy. And I guess on that note, Sandy, it's almost about trying to merge the new normal and the old normal, so that, as you say, it's because when people very quickly moved to this lockdown situation, people were rushing things out, but probably hoping that a lot of the tools they were implementing and processes would be ripped out pretty quickly. And now we're all starting to see, well, actually, no, home working, flexible working is something that's going to stay. So it's about kind of merging the whole new norm in with the legacy, really. And so you have that one security boundary and one set of policies and processes, not two separate ones that are
and also the increased focus on staff morale and HR issues and personnel issues, because not everybody is psychologically equipped for this new normal. There are people who can only forget their household chores, their kids' involvement by moving from that environment to an office environment, and for 8 hours they can focus on their work and then they go back to focus on their life. So the biggest change that we're seeing is the sort of pastoral care that you need to put into this new normal and involving people. So like a lot of organisations, we're having a lot of quizzes and we're having business chats that have nothing to do with business. So we've got a half an hour a week where our staff are on a joint call that has no message. It's just a discussion about where we are, what's happening, how you're feeling, how can we help, all this kind of stuff. So it's not just a technology change, there's a culture change. And I think that's what Irene would have been speaking about, was how that would be.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Sandy, you brought us on perfectly onto talking about security culture. So, Garrett, if you're okay to stop sharing your screen, then, because hopefully people can then see a few faces. Not necessarily want to see our faces, but you can see us, and we'll get the group involved. So I'm just going to get the panel view up. Great. So in terms of security culture, so as I said at the beginning, it's sorry, I'm just trying to hide all my mess behind me. It is something that we see talked about at many security events, even before lockdown. And I think there's two main reasons that, you know, from what I can see, that is, one is business is still struggling to get everybody to think of security as being their responsibility, and there's still too much of a idea that security, that's what the security team deal with, I don't need to worry about it. Now hopefully that's changing and people are a bit more aware about phishing and clicking emails, but it's something that it's still an ongoing battle, I think, as we all know. But probably the main reason why it's such a hot topic is because no matter how much money people do throw at security, you know, we all know that 90% or thereabouts of attacks, of breaches, of data loss happen to an individual either clicking the wrong link, you know, missending an email, making a mistake, not intentional in many cases, but somehow making a mistake or clicking that link to causing a data loss or that breach. So this is why, you know, we will be talking about security culture indefinitely within cybersecurity. But as you say, now that a lot of people are working from home, you know, much as we were struggling to get them to think about security in the workplace, now they're at home, they're surrounded by, you know, pets, parents, who knows what, kids, they're in, you know, they could be working in their pajamas, they could, you know, they're in that home mentality. So how do we just, in terms of security culture generally, you know, what are the tips in terms of making sure people don't think about it as something that they don't have to worry about? And even more so, now that we're at home, what can security teams do to try and make sure people aren't forgetting about it and going back to bad behaviors, really, if nothing else? So Brian, Garrett, Sandy, I don't know who wants to go first. I know, and by the way, we haven't prepared any of this. You know, I just sprung it on the guys this morning.
Can I upset a lot of people, because I agree with what the NCSC and GCHQ have said, which is really if you think that a focus on awareness by staff, yes, awareness is really, really important, but you've actually got to configure your infrastructure that's taking away as much risk as you possibly can, because the nature of these threats is very difficult. I mean, I've been caught out in our internal pen tests, I'm sure many people have, that relying on excuse me, that's the French bulldog snoring, relying on staff awareness, it becomes very difficult when the attacks are so sophisticated. And that one last week from, you know, Amazon, will you accept cookies? That would have sucked in most people, because it was an old exploit. Our tools caught it at the perimeter, but we're lucky that it was the way it was done was using an old tool, because a brand new tool using the same approach would probably have got through. I don't know if Brian agrees. It's very difficult. You don't want to reduce the pressure on staff awareness, but by the same token, you just can't rely on that completely because it's so difficult.
Yeah, so I think I probably would agree with that, Sandy. I think the other thing that I would like to add is the point that you made about people all of a sudden working from home, and they've got kids and they've got chores which they didn't think they were going to have to do. It's all adding to the pressure. It's all adding to the types of things that people are having to do, and we can't get too draconian over how we deal with people who perhaps fall for phishing links, because they are sophisticated. They may also have a 3 and a 5-year-old hanging off of their leg at the same time as they're trying to do things. I think we just have to, it's one of these things which we have to consider the whole psychology of how people work and act, and I guess I would urge people to, where they've got systems which perhaps, you know, look at phishing and try and catch people out, they try and be a wee bit more understanding of the situation that people are in at the moment. It's a completely, if we take the culture analogy, working at home is completely different to the way that you would work in the office. You know, let's take something simple as a clear desk policy. You're encouraged to do that in a workplace. Everyone else does it, therefore you do it. You might not be so tidy at home.
Yeah, or it might not be you leaving things around as well. Every time I sit down, I seem to have sweet wrappers or something at my desk because kids use it in the evening. But I know it's not confidential information, at least. No, it's a good point you say about not blaming people. I mean, that's certainly something Irene is passionate about. I have heard her speak before, generally, even before lockdown, to make sure that, the emails that we're getting, the people are getting more and more sophisticated all the time in terms of the email. I mean, going back a few years, you had kind of badly spelled, it wasn't that difficult to detect one, but now they're fooling systems, they're fooling experts, so it's very hard to be 100% sure a person is not going to get tricked, even security experts. So having a culture where it's frowned upon, there's a blame culture, just doesn't work, because all that's going to happen is people are clicking it and then they won't tell you. So you've got to have the whole, we're all in it together. We all have to learn from it. We have to share if we have done it, and also ideally you reward and recognize when people are not failing. Let's say, if there's ways you can recognize, reward people for embracing security, become security champions. I mean, I know some companies, for example, run phishing tests. They'll do their fake kind of phishing, and in fact, what my husband does in his company is always come out with these very clever emails about trying to get someone to click on it. But what they do is they call out after a couple, they will call out people who have done really well. They won't name and shame in any way people who haven't, but if there are repeat offenders, they might one-on-one talk to them and just say, look, what is it that's is there something we can do? Is there any extra training we can get you on? So they're trying to fix it, but in no way have it as a blame culture.
Yeah, can I add? So what's changing in the ransomware situation is there's less rather than more ransomware, but it's increasingly focused. What used to happen was you would send out 1 million emails hoping that 100 people would respond or 1,000 people would respond. What's happening now is far more socially engineered. Go to LinkedIn, find out that somebody's a key cyclist and send them a voucher for Evans for cycling. So far more sophisticated and more targeted, which makes it difficult for these phishing tests to actually do anything positive, because the fact that the email has come, the greatest rise, according to the insurance company, is corporate email, business email compromise, BEC, which is where you genuinely get an email that looks as if it's come from your chief exec's or CFO's mailbox, because it has. The only thing is that they didn't know they'd sent it. So, when you then get into a culture where, so what am I going to do? The CIO or the CEO asks me to do something, I'm refusing to do it because it's probably a phishing email, when it definitely came from their email address. So that's why I say the increasing focus in cybersecurity is how we can use the yuppie stuff, the fancy stuff, machine learning, artificial intelligence, automation, to try and reduce the amount of times where that gets through to the end user, and the end user has to make a decision, is it phishing or not phishing. So it's, as you say, yes, we've got to teach people that you've got to question stuff, but at the same time, increase sophistication, user and entity behaviour analytics, saying, well, why is somebody sending £100,000 to this address? That's never happened before. Why is somebody exfiltrating data, petabytes of data or something that never usually comes from that? In the old attacks, what used to happen is you would try to get to the department that did that kind of stuff. So once you get into an organisation, you see if you could compromise the finance department, because they're the ones that send money. Whereas sending it from me, people would question, why is Sandy sending money? He doesn't do that. It's never happened before. So I think that we're on a treadmill, but it's these fancy things like user and entity behaviour analytics, automation, artificial intelligence. Now, you don't need to go buy them, because what's happening is the marketplace is building them into the tools. So the next releases of tools that you're buying will be focused. So SIEM tools, security incident event management tools, used to be separate from, and then you would need a behavioural analytics thing on top of it. Now you're finding that most of the manufacturers are putting some aspect of basic anomaly detection into the SIEM tool as well. So I don't know if that's been your experience, Brian, but the treadmill's there, but it's not all one-sided. It's not just that they're getting better. in attacking, there's also the industry is getting better in helping you to defend. Apologies for the dog again.
That's okay.
I was just going to very quickly add to that, Sandy. The majority of these things are not done maliciously, and a lot of the targeted attacks are perhaps something which help you do your job better, and therefore you think to yourself, you know, there's a company benefit to this. If I click on this, I can improve the way that I'm doing something for the business, and that's how people are kind of got to. I mean, in fact, one of the things that we've probably seen is we've probably seen a lot more DLP alerts over the last few months. And that has not come about because people are trying to get data out of the business for their own good. It's come about because people are trying to get data out of the business for the business's good.
So just on that, there's a question come in that is relevant to this conversation. I have one or two more that I'll bring back to when we kind of move on to the full Q&A. So the question is, says really good point, what is the responsibility on the staff member? They can be aware of the risk but not know what to do to prevent the risk. How can AI and tech generally help to overcome this? So is that something you want to take first, Sandy?
No, so essentially signature-based sort of antivirus tends not to work if it's a modern virus where it's polymorphic. It's different today from it was 20 minutes ago. So what you're looking for is the AI to be looking for fingerprints, DNA traces in that attack that, while not sufficiently similar to the previous attack to trigger a signature alert, has got, you know, the AI is saying there's something in this I don't like, and I would like a human being to make a decision whether I'll let this through or not. And then it learns that kind of, I think it was Cisco used to talk about the fingerprint. They didn't need to see the whole body coming into their infrastructure. They were looking for the fingerprint, the strain of code that had been used before, that it was in hundreds of other lines of code. So this idea that the machine is learning that if you can't write a script, a signature that says block all of these because the one that comes in 20 minutes later is subtly different from the one that came in before, at least with some machine learning or AI, and there's always arguments about when it moves from being machine learning to AI, what it's doing is looking for sufficient indicators that this is worrisome to block it, at least sandpit it, and let somebody have a look at it. So it's kind of, then the feedback loop is, yeah, that was okay, we can let that through the next time, or no, that's to be added to the list of stuff that we want to auto-remediate, the stuff that we want to auto-block. So unfortunately, it tends to run on a very dangerous knife edge of, you know, if you turn up the sensitivity of your machine learning too much, you're getting an alert every 2 seconds. If you turn it down so that you don't get an alert every 2 seconds, then stuff will get through. And that's a kind of process that needs to be going through to get the balance. Not too many alerts, but not too many false negatives.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Brian or Garrett, anything you wanted to add to that?
I guess I would just say from the cultural aspect of it, it's always good as well to ensure that your staff understand what is and what isn't their kind of responsibility, or at least show them the types of controls that you've got in place so that they can understand them and understand what they need to do with it. You wouldn't just let someone from retail go and run a petrol forecourt. They need to have the appropriate level of training to deal with the additional dangers that are in place for that. So we need to be a bit more open about, so hopefully we'll get to the stage where we can stop all this, but at least explaining to people what is in place, how it works, and where the boundaries are for it.
Perfect.
Yeah, just to add, just kind of what you're both saying then really is that, you know, if staff and the organisation knows that those kind of controls are in place, it doesn't necessarily mean that the risk has gone away. It's not still present. And I think going back to the previous point is also allowing the staff to also see that these kind of areas and thoughts and processes also kind of happen in their private lives as well. You know, the kind of the COVID texts that are now being sent out, which are asking people to click links and things as well. So it gets the change in the mindset to be thinking of these kind of behaviors and thoughts in all walks of life, which will reinforce it as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Garrett. When people are undergoing cybersecurity training, which you hope nowadays is something that's ongoing and gradual rather than a big, yearly um, um, course you have to do, the more that they realize actually what they're learning benefits them as individuals and benefits their families, then the more interested they're going to be in learning about it and kind of upskilling themselves in that area. So that is a really good point that we need to continue to bring across, certainly. So okay, so let's move on from security culture, although we can always come back if it comes up as part of our conversations. But we have two questions. We have one online, and there was one that was submitted before the conference call. So that was, what are the steps for implementing cybersecurity protection for a startup, and for doing so on a very low budget? And they did emphasize the very. So I guess really the thinking is that they may not have, the funding for machine learning, AI, some very sophisticated tools. They'll be starting with quite a small company, hopefully not too complex a setup, but really starting their whole security process and solution from the ground up, really. Anywhere that particularly you get them to focus on, and how do they maximize their budget? So do you want me to come to you, Brian, first, since that kind of ties in nicely to your talk?
Yeah, so I think the answer is that from a cybersecurity spend, you can literally spend nothing all the way up to several £1 million on different types of controls. I think for me, the most important thing is understanding the type, as I said, the type of organization you are, what type of threats that you're likely to face, and therefore where that threat could potentially materialize. There are, for example, lots of tools built into Office 365, depending upon the license type that you go for, which you can get. It's not quite free, but it is part of your overall license cost. But it's proportional security spend based on the threat that perhaps your organization is going to have. So I think there's lots of different things out there and resources out there that you can look at. Certainly I've done some articles that guys could look at to kind of figure out where they need to look and the types of things that they need to consider when they do that.
Great, thanks, Brian. Garrett or Sandy, anything to add to that?
So can I say I'll be the Antichrist here and say, go cloud and buy a service. Because as a startup, you really don't want to be worrying about what it is that that you need to do this week that's different from last week. So if I was doing a startup, I'd be looking for a cloud-based service. I think, as Brian said, paying Google or Amazon or somebody a monthly fee for something, and then at least that they're going to worry about keeping the tools evergreen. One of the biggest challenges that we find with big customers is they buy a load of tools and they forget that the ongoing investment is keeping these tools up to date and moving from version to version, and remembering and having the staff capability to do that. So if it was me, I'd buy a cloud service.
Yeah, no, understood. I guess for the cloud service, you need to be very clear that you understand roles, responsibilities, what security elements they're looking after versus yourself. But the more SaaS based it can be, then the more, as you say, they will hopefully look after that. But it's just being clear on that is certainly an area that some companies seem to have fallen foul of in the past. Not that it's not that there's a security issue; it's just understanding where the responsibilities lies, really. And I guess the benefit a startup have is not many people, so you can start to get security culture in there from the start, can't you? So you can try and build that into the team from the start, really, as well, as opposed to trying to introduce it to a large company where people are used to doing things in a certain way and just aren't embracing security as their own responsibility. No, that's great. So as our last question then, and then we will finish up. I forgot to say to start, we do tend to try and finish up around about the hour, but we do leave a little bit of extra time for questions, because I know normally when you hit 12 o'clock, that's lunchtime for a lot of people. So last question, I think, and then we'll wrap up for today. So how do we properly test a major incident plan without taking up a lot of time and cost? I guess that comes back almost maybe to what I said at the beginning about the fact some people might have had these plans in drawers and suddenly kind of got cut out. How do companies stay on top of everybody know what they need to do when a major incident occurs without constantly having to test it and get people involved with the testing of it? Is there any tips in terms of getting that balance right in that area? So Sandy, do you want me to come to you first?
Yeah, so I'll start. So before I retired, I was a chief police officer contingency planning and incident response is basically what I did for 30 years. And the key thing is that the trick is to identify the commonality, identify the things that all of any crisis will have, the resource implications, the people implications, the technology implications, so that you don't have 15 plans, you know, a plan if it's a flood, a different plan if it's something else, a plan if it's a ransomware. That essentially your incident response has got a lot of commonality irrespective of what it is. So my view of major incident planning is that you've got a manual and it's got a dozen annexes, and the dozen annexes are what's different if it's a flood, what's different if it's a ransomware, what's different if it's a something else, because much of your response is going to revolve around the same sort of actions, the same processes, and getting the action cards, you know, the playbooks, as they like to call them in cybersecurity, think about them in advance, you know, who you're going to call first, who you're going to call second, what you're going to do first, what you're going to do second, so that you're not caught out with the fact is, oh, I've planned for a red coloured event and this is a blue coloured event, so I don't have a plan for that. You really need to have a generic, what am I going to do next type plan.
Okay.
And, you know, when we talked about the pandemic, the big thing that's not going to be as big a problem is the next pandemic. We already know what's going to happen. We're going to be self-isolating, we're going to be working from home, etc., etc. So that whole new bit that we didn't anticipate has now been sort of taken care of for the future. It won't be a new experience for us. But as I say, very simply understanding what are the core elements of any response, and then layering the nuances of what's different if it's this, what's different if it's that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thanks, Andy. Brian and Garrett, anything to add?
I guess just not on the technical, but I guess if the organisation, the team within that are kind of challenged about the time it's taken to test these incident management, it's also good to play back to the organisation about what's the impact of not doing it. So going back to what we said earlier in terms of what can the business do without and the risk appetite, etc. So I guess using that also as an argument to justify the need to do that, as well as obviously just adding to what Sandy said. And
yeah,
just a quick one on the playbooks. Most of those playbooks will have been drawn up and designed when you're not sitting in business continuity. And since we're all sitting in business continuity, people may want to go back and just look at them and refresh them, as Sandy's suggesting.
Yeah,
well, I used to run an organisation called NHS 24, and we could do without everything except the telephone. We didn't need computers. We didn't need to exercise plans because we were without computers so many times, because every JCB in the west of Scotland seems to find a cable that it can dig up. So, you know, it's this idea of what can't, the slide that Gareth put up, what can't you do without, and what's your contingency plan for that? I mean, I'm refurbishing a house at the moment and there's no electricity. I had to buy a generator. I had to buy a generator solely because there wasn't any electricity. So that's the contingency response to that. So it's kind of, what can you do? What can't you do without? Because what are your workarounds? You know, if you see, well, if the network falls, we can all talk to each other on Skype, on the telephone, etc. What's your contingency plan for the things you can't do without?
Yeah, focus on the essentials. Yeah, brilliant. That's great. Well, thank you guys. We've no further questions that's come up. And I know it is eating into people's lunchtime now as well. So I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining today, and in particular thank you to all our speakers. Some really interesting points brought up. Hopefully people have found that of benefit, and I'm sure all the speakers will be more than happy for you to reach out to them if you've got any follow-up questions, anything else you want to discuss with them on any of those topics. And we will be following up with a survey and also the recording, so people can listen back to anything they want to re-listen to or share to their colleagues. So on that note, we will leave it there for today. Thank you again, everybody, and hopefully see you soon on one of our next Scotland Is webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
thank you. Thanks.